Your Honor, first and foremost, thank you for allowing me the time to address you this afternoon. In my life, I've had many moments which have changed a chosen path in one way or another, but none so life-changing as the day my son was born and the day I learned of his disappearance and death. My first life-changing moment was on Thursday, April 10, 1980, the day of my son's birth. It was such a joyous moment and forever life-changing, for my life was no longer my own. I had a baby boy to take care of and nurture. Each decision and path I took was always geared towards providing him, yes, a humble life, but one full with love, compassion, and a safe home. Many sacrifices were made, including leaving his birth father when he was only 2 years old, to ensure that my son would not be raised he would not be raised with exposure to violence and turmoil in the home. Rather, to be surrounded with love, compassion, understanding, and learning how to treat others with respect. I taught my son these life values early on, which he carried throughout his adult life. Much later, when my son was about 10 or 11 years of age, I introduced him to Eugene, whom I would later marry, much later. Eugene was the father that my son had longed to have, a wonderful husband and stepdad. Both my son and I were blessed when he came into our lives. Over the years, my son felt his dad's love for us both, and as he grew older and wiser, he would share with me, "Mom, if I can be half the man Dad is, I'm going to be okay." Your Honor, my son learned throughout his life from myself and his dad what was expected of a growing man and a father. My son was hardworking, at times holding multiple jobs to provide for his children's needs and expenses. His only goal in life was to be as supportive and present to his young children, showing an interest in their education, their activities, and the plan was to be present for them well into their adulthood, to leave his children some security and a legacy. Pocho had good co-parenting relationships with his children's mothers and their significant others as well. They all worked together, always focused on what was best for the children. Life's second changing moment was on Tuesday, May 19th, 2020, now marked as the worst day of my life and one I will never, ever forget. It was during COVID, and I was working remotely from my home in Colorado, and I received a phone call from my granddaughter's mother that she had just been contacted by law enforcement. She told me that law enforcement had responded to Pocho's apartment for a wellness check and that they were looking for him. Shocked to hear the news, I told her that I would call Pocho and check to see what was going on. I called my son immediately, but the call went straight to voicemail, which in itself was strange. I left a voicemail telling him that I was very worried and to please call me as soon as he heard this message. I then texted him and received no response. My son would always respond to my calls and/or texts, especially if I sounded very concerned. He would always call me or text me to notify me that he'd call later. I then immediately proceeded to call his dad and told him that something was very wrong in Kenosha, sharing what I had just been communicated. I still had not received a lot of information, but I knew that we needed to get to Kenosha immediately. I recall receiving many calls and texts as we traveled to Kenosha. It was then that I suspected that something horrible Something so unthinkable had happened to my son. It was a dreadful drive to Kenosha, an anticipation and a sickening feeling of thinking of my boy and what had happened to him. First thing we did when we arrived in Kenosha was to go to our son's apartment. His apartment was taped off with crime scene tape, and a Kenosha police officer was securing the scene. I got out, identified myself, and requested permission from the officer. If I could just walk into the hallway. Being granted permission, I did so. My world was shattered. My heart started to race, and I felt this overwhelming feeling of despair and helplessness as I approached my son's front door. I saw blood stains on his apartment front door and walls. The scene etched in my brain, never to forget. I knew then, right then, that my son was gone, dead. I can't explain it. I just knew. All these thoughts started racing through my head. Oh my God, why? Why? My son is dead. I just started to cry, and I was overwhelmed with guilt. I felt, and I feel to this moment, guilt that I had moved away to Colorado and not been there to protect my son. I thought of our last text exchange on Saturday when he texted me a photo of him and the children at the park. I responded with another text, not knowing that it would be my last. To this day, I regret not calling him back and speaking with him and visiting with him on FaceTime. I live with these regrets and so many more. Many days went by when I received a call from Detective Correa that my son's apartment was released. I dreaded it, but I am his mother, and it was my task and responsibility to clean his apartment and pack his belongings. I prayed and found the courage the next day to go to his apartment and begin that heart-wrenching task. I unlocked his front door, blood-stained door, and entered into my hell. I sat on his couch, taking it in, crying uncontrollable, and alone. Alone with my thoughts of despair, imagining the pain my son endured as I witnessed the aftermath of his brutal attack. I gathered myself and started a walkthrough, videotaping and photographing my son's apartment. It would take me days to complete the task of cleaning and packing his personal belongings and his children's too, his furniture. I have it all, still, unable to throw away any piece of clothing he wore or item he owned. I will never forget having to scrub off and wipe clean the blood off the entry door, the walls, the ceilings, the blinds, the furniture. My son's blood was all over the front living space, with his blood spatter on his children's drawings and family photographs. While cleaning the kitchen refrigerator, I discovered my son's cell phone, driver's license, and credit cards in the refrigerator, freezer. Yet another horror to witness, and the need to call and notify Detective Correa. My only son, taken so savagely, with so much rage and hatred. Mr. Anderson did not know my son. My son had children who loved him, who had been with their dad on the days leading to his final days. Mr. Anderson did not care. He did not even care for what would happen to his own children for his monstrous actions and the pain he would cause them and his own family. A few months after my son's murder, our family suffered another loss, my mother. During the ceremony, my grandson asked me if I would be doing anything for his dad. My heart was overwhelmed with sadness and grief for my son and my mother. I had no words for my grandson and barely able to respond that we would. After some planning, we did just that. One day before my son's 41st birthday on Friday, April the 9th, 2021, we got together at the church my son attended. Family, friends, members of the community joined to celebrate the life of my son, Rosalio Gutierrez Jr. We had no body to grieve over, nor to say our goodbyes. We only had memories, photographs, and a beloved framed Chicago Cubs baseball jersey he owned. Imagine celebrating the life of your only child and not having his body to grieve over. Imagine unable to put closure to his personal affairs because there is no body to obtain a death certificate. Or his children 3 years later with no death benefits for the same reason: no body, no death certificate. We waited a long time, 3 years to be exact, for justice for my son, but it would not have been possible without the countless hours of numerous law enforcement agencies. I thank them all, especially the Kenosha Police Department, Detectives Correa and Anschultz, countless other detectives and officers for their diligent investigations in my son's case. To Judge Gabriel, formerly DDA Gabriel, for initially charging Mr. Anderson, and to District Attorney Mike Gravely and DDA Chris Sedgerick for their presentations of the facts of the case to this court and jurors, for their zealousness for justice and their compassion to our family. Finally, Ms. Heather Beasley, for her advocacy and keeping me well informed. We are forever grateful to each one of you. Your Honor, the selfish and monstrous actions Mr. Anderson took Sunday, May 17, 2020, forever altered countless lives. I no longer have the hugs and kisses of my son, his smile, our conversations and visits, watching him grow old and care for his aging parents. His children no longer have the support of their father's presence for their educational needs, life events, birthdays, graduations, weddings, and for their guidance and encouragement in their lives as they grow older. Extended family, friends, and countless others no longer have my son to call on or to share memories with. Mr. Anderson deprived my son of his life, his unfinished dreams and goals he had set for himself. Mr. Anderson deprived my son's life from his children, his family, and his friends. In closing, Your Honor, the emptiness, helpless despair I felt then, I feel today. That's 24/7, 365. It will never cease. For this mother, incapable of moving on from losing her only child. What did he do with my son's body? Will Mr. Anderson ever tell me or tell this court? I beseech this court to consider all the lives forever altered from the actions of one man, Zachariah Joseph Anderson. Mr. Anderson made a conscious, calculated, and planned decisions, which led to the evening hours of Sunday, May 17, 2020. He chose to cowardly stalk my son, consumed with jealousy and hatred towards a man he did not even know, waiting for the right time, and savagely attacked and murdered him, then hid his heinous actions by removing and disposing my son's corpse, not allowing my son a Christian burial, not allowing me a son to grieve over, nor a grave to visit. For all these reasons, and so many more, I humbly request Your Honor to sentence Mr. Anderson to the maximum sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Thank you, sir.